E. E. Cummings, or as I called him, Double E, was the most important poet of the 20th century. He invented a groundbreaking form: no use of capital letters. He didn't capitalize any of his words, which means there was no way to tell if he was a small d Democrat and a Democrat or just a small d Democrat. Very cagey man, very shady, E. E. Cummings. I don't know about poetry. I don't know. I don't get poetry. I don't understand why somebody wants to be a poet. How does that work? I have something I want to say. It's so important to me that I'm going to write it obliquely. So you must spend $250,000 on a liberal arts education to understand what it is I'm trying to say. Let me talk about love in a way that only a select few can understand so they can feel superior. I don't get poetry. I'm sure it has some purpose in this world, although Socrates was against poetry. So that's another thing I have in common with Socrates. I have something else in common with Socrates, but I don't want to share that. There are children watching. But Socrates did not like poetry, and he did not like music. Now, there was a time when music was written with lyrics that made sense. You had lyricists, and there could be a tune, and then it would be passed off to a lyricist, or the lyricist would write something resembling a poem, and he would turn it over to a composer who would add a nice tune to the lyrics. And then you had a song that made sense, like Chuck Berry's My Ding-a-ling. I don't know if you kids have been blessed. It's part of the American Songbook, Chuck Berry's My Ding-a-ling. My ding-a-ling, won't you play with my ding-a-ling? There was nothing obscured here. You knew exactly what he was talking about. The little bell on his Schwinn bike, my ding-a-ling. You didn't have to read into it. It was right there. Irving Berlin, composer and a lyricist. Must you dance every dance with the same fortunate man? You have danced with him since the music began. Won't you change partners and dance with me? That's genius, right? You know exactly what the song is about, what the lyricist is trying to say. Must you dance every dance with the same fortunate man? Clearly, Irving Berlin is complaining about being forced to eat coleslaw with a fork instead of a spoon. And when he brings the slaw to his mouth, the dressing drips all over his new shirt. Won't you change partners and dance with me? Clearly, he's asking the waiter to bring him a fresh set of utensils. Why do today's songwriters have to be cryptic? Why can't they be like Irving Berlin or Chuck Berry and just say what they mean? Well, because today's songwriters can't write lyrics. So they just decide to find words that sound poetic, and they have us do all the work. I wrote the song. It's your job to figure out what it means. I can't be bothered to know what this song is about. The fact that I wrote it should be enough. Like Paul Simon, for example. He was asked what Mrs. Robinson was about, and he said, I have no idea what it was about. I like the words, where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio, our nation turns its lonely eyes to you. And then he just built words around that, and he said he has no idea what it means. Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio, our nation turns its lonely eyes to you. Who wakes up and says, wow, I have something really profound that must be set to music? Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Our nation turns its lonely eyes to you. Really, that's what you want to say? With all that's going on in the 60s, the war on poverty, Vietnam, where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Our nation turns its lonely eyes to you. Originally, this is true, it was going to be Eleanor Roosevelt instead of Joe DiMaggio. This is true. Where have you gone, Eleanor Roosevelt? Our nation turns its lonely eyes to you. That maybe would have made sense. But I think Mike Nichols who was directing The Graduate at the time. I think Mike Nichols said, don't make it about anything, make it about Joe DiMaggio. So he changed it from Eleanor Roosevelt to Joe DiMaggio at the last minute. Here's an interesting fact. Joe DiMaggio was going to marry Eleanor Roosevelt at the last minute, but then he changed his mind. Mike Nichols told him to marry Marilyn Monroe instead. I think. Maybe I got that wrong. Maybe Marilyn Monroe was originally going to marry Eleanor Roosevelt, but Mike Nichols told her to marry Joe DiMaggio. I don't know. Just if Mike Nichols tells you to do something, listen to him. The point is you can find whatever meaning you want in song lyrics these days. That's the whole point. It's a Rorschach test. Nobody says anything with their lyrics. They let you decide what they hear. John Cougar Mellencamp has a documentary that came out about 3 years ago. One of the first things he says in the documentary is the key to a hit song is making the lyrics vague enough so the listeners can read whatever they want into it. It's form over substance. It's why Ronald Reagan could play Born in the USA at his rallies. He heard what he wanted to hear in Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. So he played Born in the USA at his rallies. George Herbert Walker Bush played Don't Worry, Be Happy at his campaign rallies. But Bobby McFerrin, who wrote that monstrosity, Don't Worry, Be Happy, asked George Herbert Walker Bush to stop playing Don't Worry, Be Happy at his rallies because McFerrin was worried about Bush winning, and that would mean McFerrin wouldn't be happy. So he asked Bush to stop playing Don't Worry, Be Happy. Unfortunately, McFerrin didn't ask radio stations to stop playing Don't Worry, Be Happy as well. Possibly the worst song ever written, Don't Worry, Be Happy. And Bush put up a fight. This is true. He invited Bobby McFerrin to the vice president's house for dinner to try to convince him to let him use Don't Worry, Be Happy. And McFerrin said no to the dinner, which looking back was probably a bad idea if you're Bobby McFerrin, because whenever you had an opportunity to have dinner with George Herbert Walker Bush, there was always a good chance that he would throw up all over you. And that's a story you can tell your grandkids. You know, Monica Lewinsky kept the blue dress with Bill Clinton's DNA on it. George Herbert Walker throws up on you. You see the stains on my blue blazer with the 80s era shoulder pads. That is presidential hurl. That is vomit from George Herbert Walker Bush. Happy President's Day, where we celebrate President George Herbert Walker Bush, who on January 8th, 1992, President George Herbert Walker Bush visiting Japan at a state dinner hosted by Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa. Halfway through the meal, President George Herbert Walker Bush vomits all over Miyazawa's lap. And it's on video. Go to YouTube and look up George Herbert Walker Bush vomiting on Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa's lap. He vomited right on the Prime Minister's lap, not to the side of his lap, not on his own lap or on his own plate or the Prime Minister's plate. He vomited right on the Prime Minister of Japan's lap. And he later said he had a gastrointestinal bug, but we know the truth. Anybody who's about to throw up knows where to direct the hurl. You don't vomit on someone's lap unless you're doing it on purpose. Nobody accidentally gets their lap thrown up on. When I was a teenager watching Olivia Newton-John on MTV, I had my lap thrown into, but that wasn't my mouth. I was throwing into my lap. And at first it was confusing and then delightful. I'm too old now to throw into my lap anymore by myself. I'm too old. Like I said, it's a holiday, and I've decided to take President's Day off, as you can clearly see. I threw into my lap, but not, I didn't have anybody throw. Anyway, George Herbert Walker Bush, it's President's Day. George Herbert Walker Bush was running for re-election in 1992. And that's when he threw up on the prime minister's lap. Less than a year earlier, he won the war in Iraq, and his popularity was 89%. This was in March of 91. It was almost the year. He had 89%. Would have been nice to have 91%, but he had 89% approval rating. Bush received an 89% approval rating after declaring victory in Iraq. Remember Operation Desert Storm? That was the highest presidential job approval rating ever recorded. America loved George Herbert Walker Bush. Less than a year later, he vomits all over the Japanese prime minister. 92, he loses to Clinton, most popular president in American history in 1991. By the end of 1992, he's a one-term president, all because he couldn't help himself. He had to throw up on the Japanese prime minister's lap. It was a calculated move. Bush thought that if he threw up all over the Japanese prime minister, it would make him look strong. But Americans thought it made him look like a wimp. But throwing up on another world leader, some cultures view that as strength. I saw it as strength. It was. What you need to understand is we're talking about 1992. It was a different time, and back in 1992, it was Japan. When it comes to economics, it was Japan, not China. It was Japan that was eating our lunch. And so George Herbert Walker Bush said to the Japanese prime minister, "You want to eat America's lunch? Here, have some of mine." Blech. It was Bush's way of saying, I was busy defeating Saddam Hussein, and while I'm busy defeating Saddam Hussein, Japan is stealing our auto market and our silicon chips. No. I'm the president of the United States. The Soviet Union fell on my watch. Saddam Hussein was kicked out of Kuwait on my watch. There's only one power here in the world, and it is America. Blech, blech. And you vomit. You vomit. I mean, I thought it was amazing. I thought it was incredible. I almost voted for him just because I respect masculinity. You vomit on the Japanese prime minister, and the Japanese prime minister just sat there and took it. He didn't punch Bush. He didn't get up. He just sat there with Bush's warm sashimi all over his stinky lap. But it backfired, and people thought he looked weak. And later in the year, Bush lost to Clinton, all because he threw up, and people didn't understand why he threw up on the Japanese prime minister. They misread it. They thought he looked like a wimp. That's one of the reasons George Herbert Walker Bush lost in 92. Also because during one of the presidential debates, Bush looked at his watch. And that's another reason he lost. During one of his debates with Clinton and Ross Perot, Bush looked at his watch, and people said he was bored with being president. Now, what he should have done was shouted during the debate, "Hey, Clinton, hey, Bill Clinton," then looked at his watch, shouted, "You know what time it is? Well, let's see. The big hand is on your lapel, grabbing your jacket towards my head, and the little hand is down my throat because I'm about to hurl tonight's pre-show lobster roll all over your lying face, Bill Clinton, you draft-dodging, whoremongering fraud. My family owns this country. You're just a tenant farmer." Bleh. Just vomited on Clinton's face. The Japanese prime minister gets the lap. You're down in the polls. You go for the face. Headshot. Take him out. But George Herbert Walker Bush wasn't willing to do that. And so he lost. Went from the most popular president in American history to losing the presidency a year later. How fickle we are, the United States, how fickle this country is. One year, you're the most popular president in American history. The year later, Americans show you the door. What a humiliating defeat. George Herbert Walker Bush, 1991, was the most popular president in recorded history. 10 years later, he became the second most popular president in recorded history. Nobody had broken his record, but he was surpassed when George W. Bush became president his first year. This is true. George W. Bush became the most popular president in American history right after 9/11, when the World Trade Center came down and the Pentagon was attacked. On 9/11, the day after 9/11, George W. Bush became the most popular president in American history. George W. Bush got intelligence briefings that Osama bin Laden was, quote, intent on flying jets into the World Trade Center before 9/11. He got those intelligence briefings. He ignored those. He didn't even read them. He ignored intelligence briefings. He never met with his anti-terrorist experts in the White House, didn't have a single meeting with Clark. He was warned that Osama bin Laden would be the number one thing he would be focusing on when he became president. George W. Bush ignored all the warnings. World Trade Center comes down. The next day, George W. Bush becomes the most popular president in American history. He got a 90% approval rating right after the towers came down, which means the American people don't like to see you throwing up, but they love watching you shit the bed, which is what George W. Bush did before and after 9/11. He completely shit the bed, which brings me to our current president's approval ratings, Joe Biden. They've hit a new low. 39% of Americans approve of the job he's doing. To which I say, Joe, pull a George W. Bush. Shit the bed. If anyone can look like he can shit the bed, it's Joe Biden. You can do it, Joe. Pretend the bed you're sleeping in is your pants, and America will love you again. Just shit the bed instead of your pants, Joe Biden. It is quite remarkable how quickly the public turns. Think about it. George Herbert Walker Bush, when he was president, the Soviet Union was dissolved, and he established America as the dominant superpower in the world, kicking Iraq out of Kuwait. The Soviet Union fell on his watch. The American people loved him. He won the Cold War. He was an American hero. Unlike Reagan, who lied about his war record, Ronald Reagan claims he served in Germany and liberated the concentration camps. He served in Culver City, which is a suburb of Hollywood. He filed films for the war effort. But Bush was a real war hero during WW2. Navy pilot shot down over the Pacific, which is why right after he vomited all over the Japanese prime minister, he said, Miyazawa, what goes down must come up. That's one for the island of Chichijima. That's what he said. When he threw up all over the Japanese prime minister, he said, that's for the island of Chichijima. 6 hours I floated, waiting to be rescued, float all over this. But a year later, the American people kicked him out of the White House, all because he threw up, he looked at his watch, and the economy tanked. That's why he lost. It's the economy, stupid. Bill Clinton's campaign manager, James Carville, in 92, taped that to his wall. It's the economy, stupid. People vote with their wallets, so it's the economy, stupid. And then Clinton became president, and it's a stupid economy. He became president, signed the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, repealed Glass-Steagall, turned America over to the banks who shipped manufacturing overseas and gave the American people cheap money instead of jobs, which means instead of savings, we are a nation of debtors.